First, just wanted to say thanks for coming. I want to make sure that this is worth your while. I know you're all very busy. Probably you're getting ready for the MCAT or you're studying in classes or work. So we're going to try to make this worth your time. Before we start, I also want to introduce Noah. Noah, if you could wave, awesome. Noah, do you want to introduce yourself real fast?
Yeah, hey everybody, I'm Noah. In addition to Raleigh, I am the other co-director for the MCAT here at Teach As You Learn.
And Noah's awesome. So please feel free to ask either of us questions. You can write questions in the chat. I don't know, Noah, if you want to manage the chat, but Noah's great and we're all here to help you. Just as a reminder, so we'll spend 45 minutes today to an hour just going over the MCAT strategy, which is today planning for the MCAT, making a study plan. Then afterwards, we have a study together, and that's something we'd welcome you to stay on for as well. But I'm going to share my screen and we'll get started. First, we're just going to make sure you can see my screen. Okay. Can you guys see my screen? Yes? Maybe? Okay, thanks, Jay. Okay, perfect. So this is the goal, right? So today we're going to talk about a couple things. So first, we're just going to start off picking the date, and we're going to kind of plan each phase of the MCAT studying. I'll talk a little bit more about that here soon. And then we're going to talk about general advice, and then we're going to leave time for questions. And I want to make sure we have a fair amount of time for questions because I know each of you are at different stages of your studying. Maybe you haven't even started. So we want to make sure that we can answer your questions, but feel free to chat any questions you have throughout. So with that said, first, let's just talk about this. Before we even go into planning, I just want to say that you can do this. You can crush this MCAT. The reason why I say that is growing up, I was never like the smartest kid in the class. I was very average or below average. And so the MCAT was this insurmountable hurdle for me. And maybe that feels the same for you guys. But thanks to studying and thanks to great mentors, I turned out to get a great score on the MCAT. And because of that, I was able to get into my dream medical school. And so I just want to say that if you feel right now like, oh, the MCAT is just this hurdle and there's no way I'm going to do well on it, you can do great. To give you an example, I was just shooting for a 510. That was my dream score. And because of this, and I only share this so that you can trust me with this, is I achieved a 523 just because of using some of the strategies that we'll see today. So I just want to let you know that you can do this. So hopefully that's your little motivation for today. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is there's 3 phases to the MCAT studying. This is not only something I teach, but other tutoring companies teach as well in different ways. But the first phase is going to be your content, so learning the content. The second phase, which will overlap, is practice and gradually getting to more difficult practice items. And then the third phase is mastering the content and the practice, and that deals a lot with strategy. So to do this, we're going to I'm going to show you an example of months in each one of these phases, but we're going to work backwards because when you're studying for the test, you always want to plan from the back to the front, right? So we're going to plan from our test date to whenever you want to start studying. So with that said, first, let's pick your date and your goal score just real fast for fun. just please send out in the chat just the date that you're even thinking about going for it, and then your goal score. No worries if you don't want to, but we would just love to get some interaction here. So just throw out your date and maybe a goal score. Awesome. We've got a lot of Januaries, March, hopefully a 5, 10 above, 15 March. Januaries, March or April, lots of Januaries. We got May, 5, 10. Okay, great. Okay, so let me just tell you, first off, this is great. Looking at these dates, by the way, already shows me that a lot of you guys have already thought about the MCAT, because ideally you want to take the MCAT with enough time to spare before you do your application, right? So taking the test anytime before, May, when the AMCAS opens up or the TMSDAS opens up, is going to give you enough time to be done with the MCAT and then work on your application. So I just want to say that's great. There's nothing wrong with putting a test date in May. It just might make your life more stressful. So that's great. Let me talk about this then. Let's talk about phase 3. So first, we're going to talk about, planning your AMC practice tests, also your other practice tests, and kind of this boot camp month. So once again, this is the last of the phases. We're working backwards. So let me share my screen here. Hopefully I'm not talking too fast. I just want to get through all of this and make this worth your while. Let me stop sharing this and share another one. All right. Can you guys see my screen? Can you get some thumbs up? Perfect. Okay. So I planned this out just for January, just as an example. But this would be kind of the end of a phase 3 kind of study schedule. I'm not putting all of the details on because that would be hard to understand, but I just kind of did basic road or like checkpoints for you to kind of see what an MCAT study plan would look like. So in your last month, you can see here, you've got a lot going on and a lot of tests going on, right? So I'm going to start from this down here, this last week. So I'm just planning, let's just say, to take my MCAT on the 27th. First off, that's on a Saturday. And so I hope you can realize here that I'm taking these practice tests this month on Saturdays, because I'm going to get in this routine of taking it on a Saturday. I want to get my body used to taking that test. I also want you to realize just to take a rest day before you take the MCAT. That's just a solid piece of advice, just to not stress yourself out the day before. But let's look at some of these other details. So this last month, right, this last phase, this phase 3, is all about just like really, really diving deep and getting used to taking a lot of tests, and just being so used to the MCAT that when you reach your MCAT day, it's going to feel like second nature. Excuse me. Also, I got diagnosed with COVID today, so I also have a cold, and my throat's a little sore. But let's talk about some other key features. As we get closer to the MCAT, we're going to be taking more of these AAMC full-length exams. We can talk more about this later, but you can take full-length exams, practice exams from companies, and you can also take the AAMC exams. Those AAMC exams are going to be like the golden standard. You really want to take those throughout your studying, but especially in that last month as you really get ready for the test. Another thing I want to point out is that after every full-length exam, we want to do a test review. The idea is not just to take a test, a practice test, but to learn from our mistakes. And I'm going to use this word a lot today, but I'm going to say the word gaps. We want to find our gaps in our knowledge, and then we're going to fix those gaps, right? So we have a test and then a gap. And then we also have break days. I took break days on Sundays, but you could take them on Saturdays or Fridays. I also just want to highlight that even in this last month, when you're really into studying, it's important to take break days, right? You want to give your mind time to relax. Now, the final thing I want to show as part of your phase 3 learning is doing something called the AAMC section banks. These are the hardest questions that the AAMC will give. It's normal, even if you're an amazing MCAT tester, to get maybe a 50 or 60 or 70% on these questions. But the reason why we want to study them is because it will help us really focus in on our strategies. And they're great practice right before we start to take these full-length AAMC exams. With that, Noah, do you want to add anything? And I'm going to grab some water just because my throat's hurting from COVID. I wasn't expecting that. Is that okay?
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. You can grab it. Yeah. Yeah, so I would just echo that everything that's been said so far. I definitely think that the AAMC full-length exams, to my knowledge, last time there are 4 of them. I think those are probably the most important. If you have other practice tests from other companies, I would do those earlier and save the AAMCs for, what is kind of like in this last block in the month leading up to your MCAT, because it's going to be the most representative of what you're going to see on the test. The section banks are definitely really hard, but also really worthwhile. I think CARS is probably the most helpful of the section banks, because CARS is something that you can never get enough practice on. So yeah, I would just say that practice is really the key in that last month. The MCAT is testing your endurance just as much as it's testing your knowledge. So to just see things over and over and over again and is really helpful.
Thanks so much, Noah. It looks like we had a couple of hands raised, and we can take some questions here as well. It looks like JT, do you want to go first?
I was going to ask, when you mentioned section banks and for cars especially, how many times do you suggest that we do the banks and the Q packs for cars?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I would probably save the section banks, and no worries if you don't know what these words are, you'll begin to learn them, but save the section banks and maybe only do them once here at the end. The question packs I'll show a little earlier, and you can use the question packs more throughout your learning. But you can repeat these questions again if there's enough space between them. Hopefully that answers that question. Noah, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I would just echo that. Yeah, that's exactly right. I would say save it towards the end. I would be careful if you repeat a section bank or a Q pack too quickly, because you're going to get a false sense of confidence because you're going to remember questions and the answers, and it's just natural. Even if you don't consciously recognize it, your brain's quite amazing, so you'll remember things and get a higher score than you did before.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Someone else raised their hand, but then their hand disappeared. Did anyone else have another question?
Hi, my name is Tasia. I had raised my hand, and I just want to say thank you both for creating this space. So my question was, I have used Reddit a lot to see what people are up to and what folks are doing, and one of the recommendations was to potentially go through the Cubic or question bank towards the beginning-ish, like if you feel like you have enough content understanding of your study schedule, and then like try to repeat it again at the end, just because the AAMC material is so aligned with what you're going to see versus some of the test companies. And so I just wanted to hear your opinions of that. And I think one of the things you were going to offer was to recommend potential test companies as well. So if that's not necessarily the right approach, maybe just finding or offering what the best test company is to use or test companies to use would be, then that would be helpful versus just repeating AAMC material multiple times. Thank you.
Thanks, Tasha. So how about this? So I'll just quickly answer kind of the first part of your question. And then once we get to the questions at the end, we'll probably recommend different testing companies, if that's okay. As far as your first question, I think the underlying thing is how do I practice, right? And we're gonna get into that right here with the second phase. But I wanna just show this point that when you're doing your practice, you wanna start off with easy practice, and then medium practice, and then hard practice. And by easy practice, we're just talking like not even reading a passage. This could just be, if it asks like, what does, what does the element K stand for? And if you don't know that's potassium, then that's something you need to know. And so we don't need to do a AMC question to learn this. We can learn this from other things like Jack Weston or other sources that we'll talk about later. So we'll talk about these three phases, and that kind of leads directly in to the next phase. But while we're on these three stages of practicing, I just want to point out that the section bank is the hardest stage, right? So in your mind, I hope you can realize we're working up to this hardest stage of practicing, which is the AMC section bank. So with that said, let's go to phase 2. These are great questions, by the way. Okay, so can you see my screen here? Oh, okay. I'm just not going to put it in the slideshow mode just to easily come in and out. But phase 2, basically phase 2 is all about practicing, and this is going to overlap with phase 1 and phase 3, but it's all about doing easy, medium, and hard practices. And there's a time specifically right before your big MCAT month, which is the one I showed just previously, where you can kind of see this transition from easy practice to harder practice. And I want to show that right now. So let me share my screen. Sorry guys about this COVID cough. Hopefully that's not too annoying for you. Okay, so this is a lot, right? But let's just kind of go over it. Once again, it's not everything, but just want to show you. And I can take a screenshot of this and we can share a picture of these calendars later. So this we see at the end of this month, this kind of full-length exam that we had at the first week of January with that section bank. So once again, that's the hardest study practice. I had a little break here for Christmas because I just want to say, or the holidays, just to say like take breaks, that's important. But now let's kind of talk about what practicing would look like, especially as you start to transition out of the content periods into more of your like full-on boot camp month of tests. So hopefully you can see here starting off, we've got our content, and I'm going to show you more of a content week, but the content is something you would learn throughout the week, and then you would take kind of a test at the end of that. In this case, it was an AMC exam, but I'll show you what a normal one would look like. But now that we're in December, so maybe I'm thinking of like a 4 to 5 month study strategy. So this is 1 month before my test. What am I doing? So now I'm really doing CARS every day or every other day, and I'm doing CARS timed, right? And that's really important. We want to make sure by this phase, we're doing cars timed, and at least 2 cars if we can. So you could do them back to back. So you can go, you do one and do the other one without taking a break in between, because that's going to be a skill that we need to develop. The next thing is we're going to start doing timed practice problems. This is this middle level of practice, right? These practice passages can come from UWorld, they could come from Jack Weston, they could come from Blueprint, they could come from whatever source you're using, or Khan Academy. But the key is we want them timed and we want them to be passages. So no longer just easy questions, we want them to be passages. And then after doing a day of that, we want the next day to be filling in those gaps. So let's say I missed something about a physics concept on Monday, then the next day I'm going to be focusing a lot on what I missed and relearning that and then putting it into Anki. We're going to talk a little bit about Anki in the next phase. As the weeks go on, we're going to switch more to the question packs. This isn't like exactly the weeks you need to do these, but we definitely want to switch more into those AAMC question packs before we get to the section banks. So just as a review, we're doing easy questions. Those aren't even passages. Then we're doing timed passages, which could come from UWorld or other strategies. Then we're doing question packs. Those are coming from the AMC, but aren't crazy hard. And then finally, we're doing the section banks. That's a lot of words, I know. But hopefully this will kind of show you more of it's more the concept of trying to get to a harder and harder practice problems while also having time to fill in your gaps. We want to make sure we're filling in our gaps. With that, Noah, is there something you want to add?
No, I think this concept of gradually building up to the real thing, and with extra making sure you're timing, doing cars every day, I think that's really important. I think, and you've hammered on it a lot, which is awesome, but I think one thing that's criminally underrated when it comes to MCAT prep is people focus too much on what you're good at, and you really, like he's been saying, is you have to drill down on your weaknesses. Find what you're bad at. If that's physics, you need to go look at the formulas again. If it's organic chemistry and you don't know what an SM1 reaction and it's 1 month out from your test, you need to figure that out before you go in for your test. So it's just kind of this thing, building upon your skills, and timing is going to become increasingly important, because I know so many bright students who are very skilled and know their stuff, but the timing just gets to them. So that's just as important to rep as the content is.
Thank you, Noah. Yeah, those are, if you can't tell, Noah and I are very into working on those weaknesses, right? Fix the weaknesses. And then as you get better at practicing, make sure that we start to include timing, right? So we've kind of done January, we've done what December would look like. Obviously, you can switch this with months. We're going to get to the next months before that, but does anybody have any other questions relevant to this? Once again, at the end, we're going to have a dedicated time for questions. Okay. Hopefully this is helpful. I know it's a lot of information. We're kind of just spilling information at you guys. We just really want to help, and we want to make sure that you get all of this information while also giving time at the end for lots of questions. Okay, so let's talk about the next phase. Okay, so finally we have phase 1. So this is the phase we're actually starting off with. This phase, we're going to make sure that we're going to start or pick a date for when we want to be done with content. So this phase is all about content, from when we start and when we end. Also, we want to make sure that we've got an MCAT practice baseline test with maybe some practice tests scattered throughout, but not frequently, maybe once every month. or once every month and a half. But the key here is really to focus on the content. The reason why I want to say this and why I think breaking up these phases is so important is we're talking about gaps, right? We're talking about weaknesses. Let's just imagine you're in January and your test is in January and you miss a problem. If you haven't mastered the content at the very beginning, you won't know if what you're making a mistake on is the content or the strategy. So we really want to master the content, especially at the beginning. That way, when we make mistakes down the line in the future, we know we can't just make an excuse like, oh, I didn't know what that content was. We actually start to realize, oh, maybe there's a strategy that I'm not implementing. Maybe I'm not reading well. Maybe my timing's off. So basically, by doing the content at the beginning, it's eliminating those excuses at the end, and we really know that we need to focus on strategy. That's not to say that we're going to know all of the content perfectly, but I just want to say that focusing on content at the very beginning is going to provide a great base. So with that, let me share my screen. Okay, so we're in November now. Technically, this would be November, and it would probably look the same for October or September. Okay, so just imagine this all being the same. First off, and I forgot to write this here, you'll want to start off with an MCAT baseline test. And that's going to just kind of help you know where you're at. It's also going to feel good later when you finish that and you can look back to say, hey, look how much I've improved. That's a great feeling. But the majority of this is just content. Noah and I will talk a little bit about how to learn content, what resources we can use in 2 questions from now when we have time for questions. But I just want to show you that really you're doing content the whole week. And the way that I love to do this is I love to take a topic of content. So maybe I would say, okay, I'm going to learn everything about biochemistry from Monday, November 30th to Friday, or October 30th to Friday, November 3rd. And then I'm going to test myself on that content on Saturday. And those will be with the easy questions, not passage questions, but very easy questions. You can find them on Jack Weston. These are questions where it literally says one-liners, like what organelles are in a cell, and then you just click the buttons, right? The reason why is we don't want to spend time on anything else besides just seeing if we actually know the content. Then, like we've learned before, we want to fill in our gaps after that. So maybe the following Monday, we'll fill in our gaps, and then we're going to do content again, just learning all the content we can. I do want to show here that it is great to do cars probably once a week. But you don't really have to do cars time. Sometimes it's great just at the beginning, just to learn how to read the cars passages and take time to figure out the logic behind cars and figure out what they're asking. So it's kind of like easy cars practice. But once again, this kind of basic structure of content, then test your content, is just really helpful. And you'll want to plan out to have that content done before you start into that transitional full-on practice phase. With that, Noah, is there anything you want to share here?
Yeah, no, I would just say that content is the base of your MCAT performance, and it's really setting the foundation for everything that comes later. In my mind, I think there's really 3 categories of scores. I think below 500 means that you have a content deficiency. Below 500 tells me that you don't know some of the basic and intermediate things that you need to know to do well on the MCAT. 510 is really the next benchmark. At this point, you have a solid grasp of the content, and you're pretty good at test taking strategies. 520 is really like next level. You know your content, you're drilled down, you know things like the back of your hand, you're an expert test taker, and a little bit of luck and the test might have played to your weakness, played to your strengths, to be completely honest with you. So, I think just keeping that in mind, you have to reach the minimum, which is good content, before you can start building on those extra skills in phase 2 and 3.
I love that, Noah. Thank you so much. And how did you, this is just one example of studying content, maybe doing a big topic per week. How did you study your content, to give them a different example?
Yeah, so I mean, I think I would kind of I started out with things that were harder, and I think I saw on your slide. So it might be a mix of different subjects. I wouldn't necessarily focus on one specific subject, but just kind of the things, say like physics. I don't know, what's a random thing in physics? Like magnetism, or in like psychology, maybe I'm having trouble with like psychosomatics or some of the disorders. I'm having trouble in remembering that. And just start off like with those things that I know I'm not confident in, and review it that way, and still do some practice at the end of the week. But I do like the idea of sticking with biochemistry or chemistry or physics and having one subject. I mean, it can certainly be easier that way, so you're not overwhelmed with all these different things floating in your head.
Right. And I'm glad Noah brings this up. There's not like one perfect way to study content. The idea though is that you take the time to do it, right? And also that you don't push the hardest things off to the end. I would never put, like, physics was always my weakness, so it's not like I would put physics the week before I really started transitioning into, or the very end of my content, right? Okay, with that, does anybody have questions about this phase 1? Okay, Charles, do you want to ask?
Yeah, hi. So I haven't actually started my MCAT studying it, but I do have the Kaplan. Sorry for the noise in the back. I have the Kaplan set, like I have the full set. So I'm wondering, like, for my phase 1, when I'm going through content, like, because I kind of want to go through all the books, like give myself time to do all that just to make sure I have a solid content background. And so should I spend like 1 week doing like a full chapter of the physics, or should I mix it up, and like what would you recommend?
Yeah, I'll share mine, Noah, whatever you think as well. What I would do, Charles, is I would plan out from the like we've done, look, when you're going to take the test, make sure you have a full month of lots of tests, and then maybe a transition month. And then with the remaining months, I would break down those weeks into how many chapters you have, right? So let's say you've got 40 chapters and only 20 weeks, then you would know you need to do 2 chapters a week. If you've got 20 weeks and only 10 chapters, then maybe you need to do 1 chapter every 2 weeks. So hopefully that makes sense, but using other third-party resources like Kaplan or Blueprint can be helpful because they almost give it to you in chunks. And so you can know how many chunks you need in a week. Noah, what would you say?
Yeah, I'd say that's spot on advice. I think this kind of touches on a thing, and I know you're just starting with your MCAT prep, but I would say I don't know if we talked a lot about the length of MCAT prep in general. You at this point know that it spans at least 2 or 3 months at the minimum. I would say, like, the ideal time to prep for your MCAT is 4 to 6 months. I think more than 6 months is excessive. You're not going to remember what you let's say your test is in January. If you start studying in April of that year, you're not going to remember what you did in April. So 6 months, I say, is the max amount of time. And just like what Raleigh said, within that period of time that you have, so say like a month at the beginning, you're really just doing content. The month right before your test, you're really focusing on practice questions. In that 4-month window, find a way, and whichever way you do it, whether it's by topic domain, whether it's by your hardest subjects, break it into those chapters and tackle it that way.
That's great. And I'm glad you pointed that out, right? Sometimes people are like, whoa, like that's a lot of time to study for a test. But really, this is something, I love to Noah said it, like 3 months would be kind of the minimum, right? And I like how he said anything over 6 months might be too much. Now, that's not to say that, if if you know your schedule is going to be really busy, I wouldn't just wait right now. And if your test was in March, I wouldn't be like, well, I'm just not going to start studying until November, right? If your schedule is going to be busy, then you can start studying. But we just want to highlight that there is kind of like a good range for the amount of months you want to study. One other thing I'm going to say here is you can see that we're learning a lot of content over many weeks, and we don't want to forget all of this content we're learning. So one of the most important things we can do is spaced repetition. Hopefully you guys have heard of spaced repetition. If not, you've probably heard of Anki. We just want to say that using that, and maybe we'll have a workshop on this later, using Anki or Traverse or other spaced repetition tools is so important for studying for the MCAT because you are studying over so many months. You really don't want to forget what you learned on week 1. So if you have any questions about Anki, we can talk about it during the question times, but maybe we'll also do a workshop on Anki. Okay, one last thing I just want to say here before we finish off with phase 1 is it is great maybe at the end of each month to take an AMC exam or just a normal practice exam, probably not an AMC exam, just a normal practice exam, just to see where you've learned, how much content you've learned in the month, right? So kind of like Noah was saying, maybe I'll be at like a 490 and maybe I'll be at a 500 after a month or 2 months of doing the content, right? So we just want to say that that's also important to do some practice exams, maybe on a monthly basis. I like doing it at the end of the month. I thought that was very easy for me. We got one more question by, I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Saisha?
Yeah, it's Saisha. I was just wondering, like, for MCAT, like study books, like Kaplan, like, how would you recommend studying the chapter? Like, would you recommend taking notes, which would take a longer time, or would you rather just recommend just reading through it and answering the questions?
No, it seems like something came to your mind. You want to share?
Yeah, sure. I think this is something that's going to differ learner by learner, but I favor in general the MCAT, and every standardized test when you're going into medicine thus far, it's going to be no human remembers all that information at any one time. It's just physically impossible. So I think notes is a great way to do it. Like you said, it takes more time, but it's so much information, you have so much to get through. I don't think it's wrong to just go through, read, do the questions, and just really spend your time reading if you're not taking notes. But note taking is a wonderful way to really solidify your knowledge. It's just the MCAT is so broad. It's just your study time might be unreasonable at that point,
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Like, there's a word called encoding, which means when we're learning something, we really put it in our mind. And note-taking is one of those resources to do that. Another option that I did was I just made Anki cards as I read. Especially, I wouldn't make Anki cards for things I knew, but for things I didn't know, I wanted to make an Anki card about that, and that was my note-taking, right? Hopefully that's another option. Okay, with that, let's go to the next part, which is just kind of general advice. We're going to share general advice, and then we're going to get to questions. But thank you for the questions we've already had so far. So I've kind of thought about, like what would be like the 6 tips that I could give to anyone studying for the MCAT. Noah, feel free to hop in here. Here's the 6 I think would be really helpful. Number 1. Is make sure you're asking questions to people who've already taken the test. You guys are doing a great job of doing this right now. But going into the test blind, right? Going into the test without asking anyone what it's like to take the test on the MCAT day just could lead to errors or problems. You can join our community, the TAYL community, or Teach As You Learn is a great community to ask that. Reddit's a great community. But if you ask in our thread, then you can directly ask Noah or I throughout the year. So we'd love to help. The second thing is to get a tutor if you can. Not necessarily a test prep company if you don't need to, but for sure a tutor. I would highly recommend getting a tutor, especially to teach you strategies. and to help see where you're messing up. The tutors might not be as great as teaching you content. That's why you can learn content from other things, but having a tutor can be very helpful. The next thing is to take the time. Noah and I just talked about this, but please take the time to study for your test. I've met so many students who said like, well, my schedule's super busy. And I've said, well, like, maybe do you want to, lighten your schedule with either at classes or work? They say, I don't know if I really want to. I'm just going to try to study the MCAT in the nighttime. And for some people that might work, but my thought here is it takes so much time to study for the MCAT. And if you can do well on the MCAT, then you don't have to save a full another year of studying. You can have more options to get in the med school of your dreams. You have more options to get scholarships. So the money thing shouldn't necessarily be a huge issue. And I mean, obviously, we don't want anyone starving while they're studying for the MCAT. But I just want to say that if you have the resources and the means, take the time, right? I took a full semester off for applications and for the MCAT. People might say that's crazy, but for me, it was totally worth it. So I just want to say that's a really big one. Noah and I have already talked about this. Focus on the weaknesses. That's really important. We've already talked about this. Use spaced repetition like Anki. And then finally, don't forget CARs. Sometimes people just forget to study CARs, and hopefully you've seen today that studying CARs and practicing CARs is important. Okay, that was a lot of tips. Noah, is there anything else you want to add to this?
No, those are great 6 tips. I think I would add to not overburden everybody, because I know we're just like vomiting information at you. But projectile. So I think a little bit more on the logistical side. There are only certain test centers that administer the MCAT. I would the day before and or certainly very early in the morning of even find a testing center if you can. That you won't always be able to get back there, but find a room or the area where you're going to go to find your test. That just put me at ease, knowing this is where I'm going to be. This is the room where I'm going to go to. You can even scope out, here's the bathroom, because I know I'm nervous. And find those landmarks that so your test day is a little bit less stressful. The other thing is certainly the day before, relax, or maybe even the week before. I took an entire week off before my MCAT. I'm just like, I know it. There's nothing I'm going to do in this last week that's going to make me an MCAT king. So just relax and know that you put in the work. That morning, I know we put a lot of stress on the MCAT, and it's a very important test. But remember, it's just a number. You're not defined by your MCAT score. So while it's important to put your best foot forward, know that it's not the end of the world if you don't get the score that you want. I think my last tip is don't get discouraged as you're studying about your score improvement. You got to remember, the greatest score improvement is probably going to happen during your first 1 or 2 months. You might go from 500 to a 510. If 3 weeks later you're at a 512, that doesn't mean you're not improving. It's just you have more knowledge, and the gaps are becoming smaller and smaller and smaller. So it's actually going to take progressively more and more effort to get those smaller and smaller gains. So don't get discouraged over that. You're doing great. And I think you guys are going to crush it.
Yeah, I love what Noah said. Just want to support what he's saying, that it's just a number. There's also a hyperinflation on Reddit. It almost makes you seem like you need to get a 520 to get in med school, right? That's not true whatsoever, right? You can get in with a much, much lower score, and you can get scholarships with a much lower score as well. So we just want to say you're going to do great. It's just a test. Obviously, it's a great way to practice. Studying is it's a fun goal to have. Try to enjoy the MCAT studying as you can, but just know that it's not the end of the world. And also just to enjoy the breaks, right? Enjoy the breaks you have. Don't get too burnt out with it. And with that, let's just kind of go to questions. Maybe, I don't know if if we've had the other mentors hop on yet. So maybe we'll just keep doing questions for at least 5 to 10 minutes. So feel free to ask any questions you want here, and we'll try to answer them. And once again, you can ask these questions on Slack on the TAYL group me to both Noah and I throughout the next couple months.